And we are live. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. Kosmographia, the Randall Carlson podcast, and we are live. And I see there's already a bunch of you in the chats. Fantastic, because this is a Q&A episode. Randall is going to attempt to answer questions, possibly answer some, and maybe tell some of you that he has no idea what you're talking about. We'll see what happens.
Is that good? I think all of the above.
That's right.
From his new studio digs.
That's right.
Decatur, Georgia.
Look at that new studio Randall's in.
It's getting there. It's not finished yet, but it's getting close.
Yeah, it is beautiful.
Oh yeah, it's going to be great when it's another couple of weeks. It'll be great. So I'm going to be starting to have guests. I've got my first guest lined up for the in-studio interviews. Going to be Ben Johnson, Ben Seal, and Sean Webb. The Two Seals and remember the podcast, Two Seals and a Squid? Or no, Two Seals and a Walrus?
A walrus, yeah. That's what it is.
Yeah.
A squid. And you guys might be able to, we also have Brad in studio with us. Brad is here in Texas.
I thought something looked different.
Yeah.
If he's there with you guys. You're in the cube.
He's in the cube with the snakes.
That's like really like that's the new terminology for like ultra hip and cool. Yes. You're in the cube.
In the cube.
He's in the cube.
You have made it to coolness, Brad.
And we're having a
I've been hanging for a long time.
Chug Norris.
Yeah, having some Chug Norris.
Courtesy of Eldor. Thank you, buddy.
Chug Norris.
Oh, yeah, it's from our buddy Eldor. And so Randall, did you happen to check out the lunar eclipse last night?
Yeah, I did.
Yeah. Was it cloudy there?
It was kind of overcast, and trying to get a shot of it. I got a little shot of it. Yeah, that's why it's like it made me yearn to be back out in the land and out of this urban morass here. But it's not bad. I mean, I got it pretty good where I'm at, but.
Quite a show here from the tower patio last night.
Yeah.
Had, Kyle and the wife and the kids and our buddy Dan and his kids that were on the weekend trip with us. So,
yeah. That was a great viewing spot.
Yeah, watch the whole process come and go.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I got the telescope out and managed to take some pretty good photos through the telescope.
Mm-hmm.
That was fun.
Oh, nice.
Yep.
Yeah, I had clouds here.
It
was actually clear in a lot of the sky, and then I saw it just enough to see where it was, and then a big dark cloud came in and stayed there for the whole rest of the time.
Oh, well.
So,
yeah, not everybody got to see it. But you can stand under the clouds and notice that they get really dark, and then they'll get bright again, and you know that the eclipse happened.
Give her a minute.
I mean, sure. We'll go with that.
Well, we already got a couple of donations. I just want to mention Crypto Chris donated $100, says just helping out with the tab. Hi, Randall and gang. Hopefully I can catch the end of the show later. Got lots going on tonight. Cheers. So thank you so much, Crypto Chris. $100.
Thank you.
Yeah, and we also have Jason's Fun, $27.99. No question.
You forgot.
No
you
comment.
Forgot to send the question.
Yeah.
Send it.
So what other plans you got, Randall?
Well,
what do you got coming up?
Well, wrapping up the studio, we're going to do this conference table back here.
Yeah.
That's the basic frame is built, but now it's got to get finished, and I'll just slide aside here. People can take a look. That is going to be the octagon. We're going to have some world shaking conferences around that octagonal table there. And it's the top we're going to do. You'll see it. I won't go into it too much other than say we're going to do a large inlaid, it's all going to be inlaid wood, marquetry. You know what marquetry is?
No.
Okay, it's working with, you do patterns and designs and inlays of usually wood veneers. So we have 4 different kinds of imported woods from various places around the world that we're going to veneer the top of that table with, and then it'll get wrapped around with a black frame and the black pedestal. It's going to look pretty sharp.
So are you actually going to get Joe Rogan in the octagon, like you and him, head to head?
Hey, yeah, that's the idea. Yeah, next time he's in town. That's it.
So you have to get that outfitted with a couple more cameras, and you'll have mics coming out right out of the
Yep.
middle of the desk there. Yeah, it's going to
Yep.
be a trick setup.
That's next. So Sean Webb, it's 2 seals and a walrus, Sean, who was with us the entire, 9 days out in Sedona, who gave some presentations. Yeah, he's coming in Wednesday. And we're going to, I've got these lights that I installed that we're going to install, that I ordered, and they came in last week. So I might, when we're ready to put those, what are you doing Wednesday, Kyle? You're more of an
Band
audio
practice.
man, though, right?
Yeah, rehearsal on Wednesday.
Who's the light? Russ, you could maybe give us some advice on how to position these lights around the conference table.
Maybe. Yeah.
Maybe.
I mean, I'm not an expert on that, but
Okay, well, that's why I got Sean coming in. He did his studio and he experimented, and I think he's got a pretty good handle on how we need to set these things up. So
okay.
he's coming Wednesday, and then he and I and Ben Johnson, who we all, we're going to get him on the show one of these days. And Ben, is the 11 years Navy SEAL, now retired, who is developing the laboratory in North Georgia.
Right.
We'll talk about that when we get to that subject.
Okay. Well, we have a question
Okay.
from Shane Avery, $20, says, really hope you guys can take a deep dive on The Land of Kim by Geoffrey Drum. He thinks the pyramid structures and others were used for producing industrial chemicals at a large scale. Very good stuff.
Well, sounds interesting enough to take a dive into it, but I've never even heard of that theory. It's a new one on me.
Yeah. Might have to take a look at that.
We'll have to take. So you're going to get that note. We'll look it up and do a little background on that.
Yeah.
Well, now that we talked about pyramids meaning fire in the center, maybe that'll apply.
Maybe
It could.
industrial chemical. So who's the author of that book?
Geoffrey Drum. So Geoffrey Drum.
Jeffrey Drum.
Yeah.
No, I don't think I've ever heard of it.
I like all, it's fun looking through ideas of what people think the pyramids may have been for. It's hard to come up with a theory that spans all of them, especially after we've been there and kind of crawled through a bunch. It's the Great Pyramid is one thing, and then even Khafre right next to it is completely different. We didn't get to go inside of, Menkaure, but then a lot of the other pyramids, they don't seem as industrial on the interiors, whereas the Great Pyramid is very much like climbing around in a machine. And so is Khafre. But they are very different on the inside. So
I would not even think about ruling out a technological or industrial purpose for those structures.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Which does not contradict the geodetic correlations worked into the architectural dimensions and proportions of at least the Great Pyramid, the Pyramid of Khufu. I haven't done the kind of analysis on the other ones that I have done with the Khufu pyramid, which would be a really interesting exercise to do. And it's been kind of in the back of my head to take a closer look at in-depth geometry of the other pyramids. I've looked at the Bent Pyramid a bit. There's some interesting stuff going on there. And you guys did the Bent Pyramid, didn't you?
Yes,
you were there?
we did. Yeah. It was amazing. Yeah. That one has, out of all the pyramids, the most casing stones left. It's unbelievably beautiful. And
it is.
You can the lines. You can stand at the corner of the socle where the corner used to come out and look up that corner line, and it's just pristine, sharp, unbelievable, amazing. So, well, we have another question. This is a good one. Patty, $33. Randall, what is the oldest book you have there on your shelves? Do you know? What's the oldest book you got back there?
That's Patty
Well,
from
the oldest
Cumberland Tours.
one, I mean, I've got multiple books back there that go back to the 19th century. I don't have anything that goes back earlier than the 19th century, but I've got some, there's some Masonic books on that shelf right here that are 19th century and early 20th century.
As it flies off the shelf.
Restorations of Masonic geometry and symbolry. I have a first edition copy of that. So that's got to be 140 years, 150 years old. So I don't know if that's I'm going to have to think about that.
Yeah.
That's a good question. That was the first one that comes to mind, but gosh, there may be older ones. Yeah, no, I'm going to have to really think about that. But yeah, I've got some pretty old Masonic books from late 19th, early 20th century. What else is up there that's old? I got to mean a lot of books, from the 20s and 30s, 40s, books that I bought when I was first starting to do research, in the late 60s and early 70s that were brand new then. And, are collector's items now.
All right. Well, there's another $10 donation from Shane Avery again. It says, snakes are going to go nuts for the land of Kim. The best part is it encompasses all of the theories. Okay, so that's interesting. So maybe we'll have to take a look at that.
The land of Chem, like K-H-E-M?
C-H-E-M.
C-H-E-M.
As in,
Which
like,
is
chemistry.
weird.
Yeah. Cause
I got it. I
Yeah.
see that. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'd seen the connection between the chem and alchemy before, but
Right.
this is it's probably worth checking out. Are you guys going to check that out? Or?
Yeah, I'll check it out.
Yeah, I guess we'll have to. Yeah.
I
for
hope it
sure.
has an audiobook.
Okay, Jason's fun again, $27.99. About the Sphinx enclosure. The rain, etc., needed for erosion happened 10,000 years ago, and the Egyptians were 4,000 years ago. And the Egyptians could work stone. Why would they leave the walls in such rough shape?
Why would they? I don't know if there was a practical reason other than what would you do to them? Recarve them or put veneer stones, face them? I mean, sections of the Sphinx are faced with restoration stones. Is that what you would do? I mean,
Yeah, I don't know.
I guess it would be, excuse me, it would be a big job.
Yeah.
And maybe nobody thought it was necessary. There have been apparently restoration campaigns on the Sphinx itself.
Yes. That's
John Anthony West thought that the head had been recarved, and I suspect that he's probably right. But maybe they looked at it and said, hey, let's leave this alone so that the people in the future can look at this and figure out that there was a lot of water that came through here once upon a time. Because I would imagine that if that was water produced and the magnitude of the floods that produced it would have been such that whatever was there before was probably flooded out. And probably you would have even had an abandonment of the plateau there for a while. So it may have been that if you had, because it's the same idea that you've got these enormous floods, terminal ice age floods that happened in Egypt. They're well documented. There are high water marks and deposits, freshwater mollusks and things that are 120 to 130 feet above the modern floodplain that date from the end of the last ice age, which tells us the river had been up that high at one point. There are sapropylitic layers of sapropylitic muds in the forming the floor of the Eastern Mediterranean that were flushed out from the Nile River during some of these tremendously great floods that picked up a lot of soil and organic material and flushed it out into the Eastern Mediterranean, where it sank to the floor and then was essentially over the next millennia or two buried and became anoxic so that it wasn't able to oxidize. And so now you have these sapropylitic muds, they're called. And when they are brought up in cores or dredge buckets or whatever, they smell because they're now exposed to oxygen. So they immediately begin to rot. But the thing was, this material has been deposited in such bulk and so fast that it didn't have a chance to oxidize. So that goes along with the depositional history of the Nile Valley, that there have been periodic, really, really big floods that have come down through the Nile Valley, probably from tremendous torrential rainfall over the headwaters of like the Blue and White Nile. And then that coming down, those two watersheds meeting and then flushing north down because the canyon, the bedrock canyon there in the area of Giza north up to the Mediterranean is phenomenal. I mean, it's filled with, I think it's as deep as the Grand Canyon, actually. The chasm of the Nile Valley is extraordinarily deep, and it's filled with sediment, a huge amount of sediment that's been flushed from the south, from the Ethiopian highlands primarily, and that stuff has filled in this huge deep bedrock trough that's on the scale of Grand Canyon that's under the Nile. So it shows that there have been tremendous erosional events that had to cut this canyon in the first place, which probably goes back to the time when the Mediterranean dried up and you had water flowing off the uplands of Africa, of Egypt. And now, instead of hitting the present day ocean level, I mean, how deep is the Mediterranean? The eastern basin of the Mediterranean. Easy enough to look it up. Where's our Jamie guy who's looking up facts
Laura.
and figures as we talk here?
What do you want me to look up?
How deep is the Mediterranean?
How deep is the
okay.
Mediterranean? Because, yeah, so the base level, picture this. If water is flowing into like a river is flowing into a standing body of water, right? And it's relatively at the same elevation, well, there's not going to be any, it's going to be a much less shear forces involved. We'll say that. If the water level drops, the base level drops, now the river is coming at a steeper gradient. It's much faster and it's going to carry more material. It's going to tend to be more erosive, and it's can do one of two things. It can either downcut, incise a trough into the bedrock, or it can bring material from elsewhere and then deposit it. And that's kind of what we see there at the Nile River, is that there had to be a much intense erosion to cut the bedrock trough. Then that had to be enormous floods to fill that up to the level that it's at now. But there have been floods, like I said, that have been at least 120 to 130 feet above the modern Nile River floodplain, which is enough to submerge the Giza Plateau, by the way.
All right, so according to Wikipedia, the average depth is 1,500 meters.
1,500 meters, okay. That's not necessarily going to be the Eastern Mediterranean, but I bet it's probably close. So that's close to a mile.
And then the max depth is 5,267 meters.
Where does it say where in the basin of the Mediterranean it is?
Just the stats.
Mm-hmm. 5,000 meters. Okay.
That's what it says, Bradley. It's Wikipedia. It can't be wrong.
5,000 meters?
That's
5
deep.
kilometers, buddy.
That's very deep.
So even if we took the average depth for the Eastern Mediterranean, you can see that drops that baseline considerably. And so most likely you had that canyon being cut when water levels in the Mediterranean were much lower than they are now. That's the point. So the Messinian crisis. That's something to check out. That's when when the dam burst at the Pillars of Heracles and the waters of the Atlantic rushed in to fill the Mediterranean basin. I think that's what it is, the Messinian crisis. Todd, you should be flying into action there. Messinian, something like that. I could be looking it up.
Brad has my phone.
Oh,
Well, I'm thinking Lake Baikal is the deepest lake, and it's like a mile, but we're talking about the Mediterranean, so not a lake.
Yeah.
right.
So there
Correct.
we go.
Yes, correct. That's a good distinction to make.
So the am I just looking up the definition here? The geologic time scale, the last age or uppermost stage of the Miocene,
No,
Messinian.
The Messinian. Let's see. Yeah, you're looking up the Messinian salinity crisis.
Oh, the salinity crisis.
All right.
Yeah,
Well, while
the
he's looking up that, thanks to Bruce Silva, $20. Appreciate
Oh,
that.
thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, really appreciate that. And
Hey,
of
Bruce.
course, our buddy Kyle DeLille threw in 20 as well.
What's up, brother?
Thanks, Kyle. And then we have another question coming up once Randall finishes.
Let's see.
this
Did we
topic.
get the previous question answered? What was it again?
It was
Oh.
it was about the why would
The
the
enclosure.
why would the dynastic Egyptians leave the Sphinx enclosure rough if they were good at carving stuff? And it's an interesting question, but it's just I don't know. Like, how do we know why they did stuff? Is always a question.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Like why?
But we can speculate,
Yeah, you can speculate.
and I don't mind speculating.
But I'm just wondering if the implication in the question is they wouldn't have left it rough, therefore they didn't know about it, or somebody else, they carved it later. I'm not sure what is implied here, but it is an interesting idea.
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah, they didn't carve anything into it. They,
Yeah. The rain. It's okay,
So I guess maybe the implication is that somehow it came after, like it was destroyed much later.
It says the rain needed for erosion happened 10,000 years ago, and the Egyptians were 4,000 years ago, and the Egyptians could work stone. Why would they leave the walls in rough shape? So I'm not exactly sure is there an implication in the question there. Maybe they didn't know about the walls. The Sphinx was buried completely. But
My thought is that the site, in the aftermath of the floods that would have submerged the Sphinx, which is, I think, is to me the most likely scenario that we would come up with. And I'm looking here. The Sphinx is, let's see, the Great Sphinx. Let me zoom in a little bit here. The ditch outside of the Sphinx is 106 feet above sea level. If I go over here to the Nile Valley, it is, what did I say, 106?
Yeah,
and
so-
it's
so I see-
55 to 60. So,
okay.
you're looking between 40 and 50 feet above the present Nile
Yeah.
floodplain. So the Giza Plateau in the vicinity of the pyramids and the Sphinx would have been easily submerged during a flood that deposited freshwater flora and fauna 120 to 130 feet above the modern floodplain.
Yeah.
That would have submerged. So now, when that much water was coming down, I suspect also that when you go to the west of Giza Plateau, you're going uphill. So let's see, if I go, let's see here, if I go, maybe about 100 miles to the west, I am 500 feet above sea level. And it's essentially sloping down from there, 543. Yeah. So it's, you've got an almost continuous gradient coming off of the desert plateau. So I'm looking here. Yeah, you get it getting up to 1,000 feet above sea level. So yeah, that's going to be any water, a rainfall falling over that. Let's say, it's a desert now. So I'm guessing desert, it's probably 5 to 10 inches of rainfall per year, if that. But if you had a completely different climate and you had a torrential rainstorm, say on the level of something, if we look at the maximum rainstorms that we've experienced in modern times, the first thing that always comes to mind that I bring up is that 1969 James River flood was when Hurricane, not Carla.
Camille.
What was it?
Camille.
Yeah, Hurricane Camille stalled over the James River in Virginia, and it dumped like 30 inches of rainfall on this one county, like in 24 hours. It was extraordinary. And in the aftermath, they were trying to judge the magnitude of this flood based upon the maximum size of the sediment that it was able to transport. And the largest size clasts or rocks that were being transported were up to about 6 feet in diameter, typically. So then by going back and looking at previous events, flood events that had the competency to transport 6 foot in diameter rocks, they estimated that they came up with, which I thought was very interesting, a 10,000 year flood. So that's still to this day, if you look that up, James River flood, Kyle, the James River flood, 1969. Now, if we assume, using that as kind of an analog, and then we assume from there that might represent sort of a threshold event, because one of the things that particular flood showed us was the extent that you have geomorphic work done, and there are thresholds, and 30 inches rainfall in 24 hours can cross a threshold of coherency in sloped landscapes. And so what happens is the saturation of the rainwater causes the ground to lose its cohesiveness, and then you have mass wasting events or landslides. And if you have an event like that, see, this is a thing to understand, and this is one of the things that the James River flood taught us, was about thresholds, because a lot of landscape stability thresholds were breached during that single day, 2-day event of the intense rains falling. But my point is that you probably had similar type of events that have occurred because they're part of the natural order of things, that events on that scale do happen, right? So if you have a massive rainfall event over northern Africa or over Egypt, you're going to get huge sheet floods running from the western uplands down towards the Giza plateau. And the Sphinx is basically low enough that was probably completely submerged during some of these events. Did you come up with James River flood to find anything?
I have a little abstract synopsis here from USGS.
Okay, what do they say about it?
Hurricane Camille became a tropical depression and soaked central Virginia with up to 28 inches of rain during the night of August 19th and morning of the 20th.
Yeah.
The rains, flash floods, and rain-induced landslides accompanying the storm's passage have been called the worst natural disaster ever to strike Virginia. Discharge of streams in the James, Potomac, Rappahannock, and York River basins exceeded previous known maximums. At Ty River near Livingston, the peak flood discharge was 8 times the previous high during the 31 years of record. James River stations downstream from the Maury River recorded peak flows of greater than 100-year recurrence interval.
Mm-hmm. There we go.
It was also pretty devastating to the coastal town of Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay. Well, I remember reading about it. I've got several books back there that have some discussion about that. One of the things that really stuck in my mind when I first read about it was they were trying to convey some impression of how intense the rainfall was. So they cited the fact that during the peak of this rainfall, birds in trees were actually drowned.
I remember hearing this.
Yeah, you might have heard it from me, but you probably heard it because it was witnessed by people that birds were found dead after the rain because they drowned.
Yeah. I mean, 31 inches in a night and a morning that's incredible.
Yeah, that's incredible. It's hard to even visualize what that would be like. But now I think we're safe to assume that we might have rainfalls of that intensity that could go on for days, even weeks. Because we know now that there are processes within nature that could conceivably induce events like that. And we're talking about primarily a bolide impact, a hypervelocity impact into an ocean or into an ice sheet, which brings us back to that. Because at those kinds of temperatures, the difference between ice and water is going to be pretty much irrelevant. You know, a hypervelocity impact into an ice sheet is going to, you know, impart so much energy that it's going to be irrelevant, really, whether it's striking ice or water. The end result, I think, is going to be the same, that you're going to have enormous injection of water vapor. I mean, it has to. There has to be an enormous injection of water vapor into the atmosphere at concentrations that would far exceed any that could occur as a result of sort of natural everyday occurrences. So it's very possible that, you know, you have a James River flood level rainstorm that could last for days. Then look what happens. You see, if that were to occur. And you know what's interesting about studying this is you really can begin to see. And when Brad and I went through there, God, whatever year that was, we could see the scars. We pointed out and actually photographed some of the scars left over from 1969 event. You can see some of them still in the hillsides where there was, you know, what happens is you'll have a landslide. And so that landslide will be a chaotic mass of, you know, mud and sand and pebbles and boulders of all different sizes. But then what happens is that the rainfall, subsequent rainfall, will wash out the small stuff and just leave a boulder field or a boulder swarm. And you can see the boulder streams on the sides of the hills in the Virginia Appalachians that had been left over from that 1969 event. So anyways, my thought is that to summarize and bring a conclusion to that question, here's what I would surmise. I would surmise that there was something there. There was a community, there was a village, there was a city, an urban area, whatever was there. And if it was built out of, say, smaller stones or, you know, clay bricks or anything like that, it's going to be an event like this that we're talking about is going to have pretty much washed anything away. And it probably meant that the site had been abandoned for some prolonged period of time, anywhere from a generation or a few decades up to hundreds of years, who knows? Now, if another group of people comes in, begins to settle there, and they build up a new civilization there, well, you know, they're going to have priorities. Well, the first thing that they're going to do is, well, let's, you know, have some kind of restoration campaign on this big monument here that's got this, that got eroded and damaged. So they work on that. They're not really too concerned with the ditch itself, the walls. That's kind of irrelevant. Their focus is on the monument.
And I'd also say that all throughout Egypt, we see casing stones over top of eroded stuff.
Yeah.
Like, in other words, they wouldn't necessarily cut the erosion off when they were fixing something.
They would fit the stones to the erosion.
Yeah. So
you saw that in the Osirion, didn't you? I think. Didn't you show examples of that?
We saw it all over Giza.
Yeah.
For sure. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's go on to the next one.
Let's move on.
But that good question, though.
Yeah, good question. Okay, so Thomas is $10 and said, "Is Jesus also a veiled allegorical reference to a comet?"
Now that's a interesting question. Well, you know, in some ways, think about the similarities. You know, a comet comes and visits, and then it goes away, and then it's expected to return, isn't it? So like a comet, Jesus is expected by believers to return at some unspecified date. I definitely would not rule out the comet associations with Jesus, and you know why? And we're going to delve into this at some point, because the parallels, first of all, between the Christian religion and the Mithraic religion, and the parallels between Jesus and Mithras, and the fact that there's absolutely no doubt that there's a cometary connection with the Mithraic religion. And so if you accept that as a working premise, and then you come back to Christianity, you can look at some of the mythology associated with it, the symbology, and there's most definitely a wealth of symbology. And if you're not afraid to like dive into and explore the pagan roots of Christianity, which certainly were part of it, I think that you could tease out some very interesting cometary connections. definitely.
Absolutely.
Well, think about this. What was the event that heralded the birth of Jesus?
It's a bright star.
Yeah, and there was a lot of ancient authors. Origen was one who explicitly stated that the Star of Bethlehem was a comet, and there were others. That was a tradition. That was an actual tradition that the Star of Bethlehem was a comet. It's been proposed by modern researchers, but it was also a concept of a lot of ancient writers, or at least some ancient writers. So if that's true, then you have a correlation right there at the outset. And then, I mean, how can you not make the cometary association when you start reading the book of Revelation? I mean, to me, it's just right in your face, all the symbolism there. So at some point, we'll dive into that. That's going to be a fun topic to really dive into. But the way we want to dive into it is we'll employ the interlinear Greek English when we get into the book of Revelation, and we'll pick out certain passages to sort of dive into. Obviously, one of the ones that we would spend a lot of time on would be the Holy City and the description of the Holy City. But there's so much in there. There's so much to take apart, to deconstruct and reconstruct within that symbolism of the book of Revelation, and or the book of Matthew. We should go in. We can talk about the book of Matthew and look at some of Jesus's prophecies in there, which certainly seem to have astronomical connotations to them. So yeah, that's a good question, but I think it's stuff that we will dive into at some point. Now that I've got my new studio, a lot of those books back there have been boxed up for several years. Okay. So I'm getting my library back out, getting it organized. So I've got at my fingertips lots of really juicy information. So that's going to make it possible to dive into a lot of this sort of arcane stuff.
Fantastic.
Well, there's also like a correlation with a bright light or a source of light and like returning in all his glory. Isn't there, some link to glory of, luminescence or some expansion of a great light?
Yes. Oh yeah, absolutely. And then you start exploring into some of the Grail connections, because there's absolutely no doubt that there's a cometary connection with the Grail stories. So we'll unpack that at some point as well.
That's a big.
So yeah, I think we're going to have some interesting shows coming up.
Awesome. Looking forward to that stuff too. I love those topics for sure. That's a great question.
Yeah.
Well, and see,
Thanks.
then, as we spend some time diving into the Grail stories, that'll have to be followed up by a Grail tour. And I'm thinking the Grail tour there'll be two parts to it. I figure
keep talking about this Grail tour.
Well, I'm thinking a minimum of 2 weeks. So either that's going to be 2 weeks as one chunk, or it'll be two separate excursions. I don't know yet. We'll have to figure that out. But the primary lands that have sites associated with the Grail, of course, is the UK and France. So that's where our focus would be. Yeah. And it would be essentially sort of doing it would almost be a sense of sort of like a Grail pilgrimage, going to all the various sites that have been associated in one way or another with the story of the Grail. So in France, there's all sorts of places that either are directly connected with it or have symbolism or traditions associated with them that are very closely parallel the Grail traditions. So we might, for example, go to Chartres Cathedral, because there's no doubt that there's a Grail connection at Chartres. We might go to Ande in France, southern France, right there at the foot of the Pyrenees, right on the Atlantic Ocean, just to go visit the little the cross of Ande in the churchyard. We might go to Lourdes, where Bernadette had her vision there, and where the bubbling copious spring issued forth from the ground as part of her vision. That's definitely associated with the Grail, and at least because of not overtly, but definitely because of the connection with water and the flowing water coming forth from the ground, which is a key component of the Grail, the meanings of the Grail. That's one of those associations. Because obviously you think of the chalice and the cup, it has the water, or it has the fluid, whatever it might be. Maybe it's water, maybe it's blood, maybe it's wine. In the stories of Joseph of Arimathea, it's blood and water, both in the Grail cup. And he takes that from Jerusalem and transports it to Great Britain. And we know the story. I've talked about it. He settles there at the site of Glastonbury Abbey, and he establishes what, according to some stories and legends, was the very first Christian church and community. And that whole story is loaded with symbolism. Dynamic symmetry is built right into the whole connection there. And there's a connection, a geometric connection that you can represent for the first little complex that was built by Joseph of Arimathea and his 12 disciples at Glastonbury, with Stonehenge and with the Holy City model out of the New Jerusalem story in the book of Revelation. And this is some really, really juicy stuff, getting into that. So that's what a Grail tour would do. We'd go probably to Chateau de Montreal, where the Templars held their initiation ceremonies. We'd go to Montsegur, which was the mountain of salvation, where the last Cathar siege took place. Amazing place. So it would be, and which legend says was temporarily a hiding place for the Grail. And then when the castle finally fell to the mercenary knights that had laid siege to the mountain, the night before the surrender, the three Templars scaled down the 300-foot sheer cliff and disappeared into the night, carrying something that legend would lead us to believe was the Grail itself. And then the next morning, the castle surrendered. It was like a couple of hundred men, women, and children, primarily of the Cathar faith, and some of their Templar guardians that apparently were associated or affiliated with or helping out the Cathars, because they were basically being exterminated, slaughtered, and complete because they were heretics. There's a whole long story there that we'll have to dive into as well, but so that would be one of the sites.
It was just Friday the 13th the other day.
Yeah, that's right. Well, that was the Templar, when the Templars were suppressed on Friday the 13th. And there is the story. So, we got some really interesting stories to get into. So we'll be exploring all this. You might think of it as the esoteric history of civilization.
All right.
And we'll look at some of these things, and then should be followed up by getting out, as long as, it's still possible to travel if, they don't, the climate change group doesn't get all international travel shut down in order to keep the climate from changing.
Oh man, I hope not.
Well,
I have a lot of places
they want to. There's a bunch of them would like to. We need to stop flying jets around.
Well, let's see. Jeff, the curator, $10.80 says, "Love you guys." Thanks, Jeff. Appreciate that.
Thanks, bro.
And John Spinoza, $10, and he says, "If I believe Solomon didn't exist as recorded, is Freemasonry wrong?"
Is it wrong? I don't know what, wrong in the sense that,
like, in other words, I guess maybe the question is if Solomon didn't exist as recorded, does that make Freemasonry wrong?
I would say no.
Okay.
No, it doesn't make Freemasonry wrong. But, it all depends on, Freemasonry is a very multi-dimensional system. There's a lot to it. And for a lot of Freemasons, the presence of Solomon and the association with Freemasonry is just symbolic. Others believe it was historic. I don't know if you could say, is Freemasonry wrong? if it was making some specific claim about the historicity of Solomon and some, documentable claim of connection with Solomon that could actually be demonstrated and show, okay, you've got this particular interpretation of history wrong, but I don't know that there is such a thing. Freemasonry is built on allegories, and I think we can say that we can now make a pretty solid case that modern Freemasonry could trace back to the late Middle Ages. Although there's major gaps, so you can't prove it. You can't say that there's an unbroken continuity of the Masonic craft from present day until, the Middle Ages. Now, what you can do is you can say that Freemasonry existed in the earliest surviving records of actual lodges meeting, and the dates that they met on, and some of the brothers who were present at these meetings goes back to 1717. So if you take the most conservative view of Masonic history, you say that modern Freemasonry started in 717. Of course, if you know at all some of the history of it, you look at what actually happened in 1717, and it wasn't the founding of Freemasonry. What it actually was a coming together of 4 separate lodges of Freemasonry that existed in the UK at that time, and it was a consolidation of pre-existing lodges. But what's known about those pre-existing lodges? Very little. However, there are 1600s, 17th century references. Elias Ashmole, there is an account of him being initiated into Freemasonry. I forget the specific year, but it's in the 1600s. Now, there have been John Robinson and a few other Masonic scholars have been really digging into the record to try to establish whether there is a continuity, let's say, between 17th century Freemasonry and late Middle Ages Freemasonry that would have been associated with the craft lodges of guild builders that would have been involved in the cathedral building era, because there was a whole organized system of initiation involved with becoming a member of the guilds that were involved in the building of the cathedrals in whatever happened to be, whether it was stone masons, it could be, stone cutters in the quarries, it could be stone carvers, it could be, glaziers, but they probably had their own groups, but then they most likely came together and had a lot of overlap. But I'm guessing that, each group would have probably had its own particular symbolism and association, because the glaziers, or those who did the stained glass windows, would have a different set of techniques and methodologies than would the stone carvers. And they would have used different tools and things like that, and different specific processes and techniques. When you look at Freemasonry, like, the tools are very important to the whole meaning of the ritual and the symbology is the tools they use. And you find that when you go through the degrees of the Blue Lodge, that the tools of the apprentice, the craftsman, and the master are different. You see, because they were serving a different function. So here comes the problem is we cannot establish historical continuity between, let's say we could establish historical continuity between modern Freemasonry and Freemasonry of the Middle Ages. That hasn't been done yet. However, as the decades go on and more people are doing research, more and more of those gaps are getting filled in. And it's my own personal belief that eventually, if we could find the evidence, if we could find the artifacts, if we could find the records, we could show that there is a continuity between modern Freemasonry and the guildcraft lodges of the Middle Ages. Here's the problem, though, because for many of those centuries, particularly the 14, 15, and even 1600s, Freemasonry was a heresy. Freemasons had to meet in total secret. So, given that, it creates a whole different environment as far as the preservation of records and artifacts and things that would show that such and such lodge is meeting on such and such date, right? So that's the problem there from the standpoint of history, is that during these times of suppression, Freemasonry had to go underground. And that's one of the things that really complicates the attempt to establish a continuous timeline. So So even if we could establish a continuous timeline from the present back to the Middle Ages, now how do we get from the Middle Ages back to the time of King Solomon? And we still got to go back another, 2,000 years. I mean, we're looking at Solomonic times roughly in round numbers 3,000 years ago. Okay, so I think that, when you look at there's evidence that there was a real historic temple built, absolutely, that it was some sort of a joint venture between Solomon and the Jews in Jerusalem and the Phoenicians under King Hiram. Now, to what extent is that solidly historical, and to what extent is it just traditions that have come down that may not be historical? It's hard to tease out those differences, because in Freemasonry it's predicated upon this metaphor of the temple, and how these different nations with different beliefs and different concepts of the Almighty and so forth came together to create this magnificent structure, right? That took roughly 150,000 people working on it for 10 years to build the thing. Now, how much of that is historical and how much of that is legendary? It's very difficult to say. That's going to come down to really probably a question for archaeologists to decipher. But again, the problem is finding the record, a documentary record that we could show. Now, which we can't. We are not able to do that now. But what we can show is that there have been different groups, say, from that time, from Solomonic times. For example, the Dionysian artificers of Greece had a structure very similar to Freemasonry from what we've been able to find out. The Roman Collegium that was involved in building Roman temples and sacred structures, also very similar, a very similar structure to modern Freemasonry. We can look at after the fall of Rome, the Comachines that settled on the island of Como, or on an island in the Lake Como in Italy, most likely played a very important part in preserving and transmitting ancient arcane traditions, including things that were Masonic. And there may have been connections between the early foundations of Italian Freemasonry and the links between them and the Comachines. So, I mean, you can make a circumstantial case that there may have been connections between these diverse groups, primarily just because of the structure of them, of their systems and of their symbology and so on. But you can't prove it. So that's the problem. It's the question that he asks is really not a question that really has an answer to it. Because, I mean, to say, is Freemasonry wrong? I mean, you have to say something specific, and Freemasonry makes no claim at this point to, some kind of a pedigree that is an unbroken chain of connections going back to Solomon's time. But what it can do is it can say that that a lot of that structure, the symbolic structure, going back 1,000, 2,000, maybe 3,000 years, has been preserved within the craft ritual and the craft symbolism and so on. Now, of that, I mean, you have a lot of different perspectives and points of view from Masonic scholars. Like I said, the more conservative ones are basically, describing the history of Freemasonry back to the early 1700s. But there's a lot of new scholarship that, again, like I said, is filling in those pieces that might establish that there is this pedigree between the modern craft. But I think we can say very solidly the modern craft is probably at least 400 years old. And I think as we learn more and get more data and more evidence, we might be able to establish, hey, look, we can go trace it right on back to the 15, the 14, the 1300s, right back, and we can show these connections with the cathedral builders and so on. That would not surprise me at all. In fact, I expect that that's going to happen. But then to take it back to Solomonic times, that's a whole different question. And what modern Freemasonry has done is taken the allegory of the building of the temple and has built a sort of a spiritual tradition around that, has created this conceptual framework of all of creation, all of the universe being an act of geometry, performed by the great architect of the universe, or the grand geometrician of the universe. And as a metaphor for the application of that vast creative framework for the universe down to the world of humans, they've taken the metaphor of Solomon's temple. So in other words, that's the idea behind all the sacred temples of ancient cultures, is that somehow they're trying to take their cosmological conceptions and embody those cosmological conceptions in 3D, in stone or wood or earth or whatever the case may be. And so very much that idea is at the core of the modern Masonic tradition. So I can't really, answer your question. And how did the question read again?
Yeah, basically it was, if I don't believe that Solomon existed as recorded, is Freemasonry wrong?
Okay, if he doesn't believe. Well,
yeah, so I reread it as, if, I guess the question is trying to say, if Solomon didn't exist as recorded, does that make Freemasonry wrong? But he does put believe in there, so I'm not sure what that means.
Right. I mean, I think it's pretty clear that Solomon probably existed, but unless you're a scholar of that, I don't think you can just have an opinion, believe one way or another,
Right,
without really,
yeah,
this is a question that you would have to, answer after years of meticulous research to have an opinion about whether or not Solomon actually existed. But no, I wouldn't say that
there it is.
the actual physical existence of Solomon, whether he existed or not, undermines the validity of the system of Freemasonry as a vehicle for the preservation and perpetuation of the symbolic language.
Okay. Well, that was a fantastic answer. So let's move. Let's go. So Patty, again, $14.44 asks, if the flood buried the Sphinx, wouldn't we see watermarks on the surrounding pyramids and temples, etc.?
Yeah. So, but
the Sphinx is
see,
lower.
That's lower. A really good question.
Yeah.
If you could establish that, you could have a date, let's say, for the most recent flood of such magnitude that it could submerge the Giza plateau. Well, now, if you could look at a structure and say, yeah, there's definite watermarks, because, hey, look, I mean, if you start paying attention, whenever you have floods leave marks. In fact, this is in a few weeks, we're going to be out in Western Montana, right? And we're going to be spending a whole week traveling over landscapes where you can see the imprints of these gigantic floods left in the landscape. Well, if you've got a huge pyramid there, and you've got that pyramid cased in, say, particularly limestone, because limestone, being a carbonate rock, it's going to be erosive under acidic waters. Rainfall tends to be acidic, right? Or floodwaters tend to be acidic. So here's the thing. If you have a building there, yes, the floods will leave traces on the buildings like they do. You can go into towns that have had, let's see, what was the town we were in? Was it Wallace? Where they have, Wallace, Idaho. I think when that flood came through there, they've actually marked on the sides of buildings, put marks to preserve the high water mark. And this is something that's commonly done. You'll have a flood, it's going to leave a watermark. It's going to, in one way or another, depending on the material, right? And the erosivity of the material. But here's the thing, if you've got a pyramid, let's say the Giza pyramid was already there and the water rose up, let's say it was 100 to 200 feet deep over the Giza plateau, which I'm not going to rule out such a depth. We want to be conservative, we just say 100 feet. And that's going to completely submerge the Giza plateau, completely fill up the Nile River Valley. Well, here's the thing. The problem is that then all the casing stones have basically been stripped off. So there's no remnant. I've thought about that numerous times. If the casing stones were still on there, would we see evidence of a high water mark? I don't know.
Yeah.
And then, of course, if a pyramid like Khephr's pyramid, say, might have been built later, like post-flood. But there again, the casing stones are missing. So you would have to look for the evidence on other structures.
There is weird and interesting heavy erosion on other structures around there. And there are also old writings or legendary sort of stories of people saying that there did seem to be watermarks on the casing stones before they were gone.
Yeah.
About 2/3 of the way up, there was a color change.
A third of the way up.
Or a third of the way up. You're right. Yeah.
Okay. Well, then that said, and I was just saying 100 to 200 feet.
Yeah.
So a third of the way up, if we go 400 and say 80 feet, we divide that by 3, we're looking at 160 feet.
Yeah. It's a lot of water. It's a good question, though.
That's a lot. That is a good question.
Okay. Pyramid Man donates $20. Thank you, Pyramid Man. Appreciate that, buddy. Matt Shy says, "Can you give us 5 minutes, Randall? 5 minutes about the Holy City, since you mentioned it earlier. 5 minutes. I'm timing you."
That was also seconded.
Oh yes, it was
later
seconded later by Patty.
Patty.
Yeah.
With another super chat.
Yeah.
So,
So
Is
Matt,
that by any chance Patty, mother of Sophia?
This, I believe so. Yes, both of those.
Okay.
The question about the flood burying the Sphinx and watermarks was from Patty as well.
Okay.
So now Matthew and Patty want to know. They want 5 minutes about the Holy City.
Well, okay. So I've got, we could use the Holy City as a launch pad for an entire 2-hour podcast. Okay.
5
and that
minutes.
would be my intention. That would be my intention. But the Holy City, and the city lieth 4 square, and the length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal. Remember that?
Yes.
12,000 furlongs. Okay, so in order to, now that's out of the King James. Now the furlong in ancient England, ancient Britain, corresponded to the stade in ancient Greece, of which there were multiple variations of the stade. But the modern furlong that's used, which is still used in horse racing, is very old. It's very ancient. And King James has utilized, in the original Greek, it's the stade. Now, what was the length of the stade referenced there is impossible to say, I think, at this point. But the furlong, the ancient unit of measurement, is most likely the same as the modern one. And so a furlong is 1/8. Let's see, 9 by 8. Yes, a furlong is 1/8 of a mile. So it takes 8 furlongs to make a mile. And Laura, how many feet are there in a mile?
Oh no. Should I guess?
Yeah, go ahead and guess. I won't be too hard on you.
Isn't it 5,000 something?
Yes.
628. No, I don't know.
Well, you got a couple of pair of numbers right, but they were just in the wrong place.
Okay, see, that's pretty close.
That's pretty close, yeah.
All the pieces are there.
Well, not all of them, but and one of the pieces is the wrong piece. 5,280.
Okay.
All right, 5,280.
It's in the ballpark.
Yeah, you were in the ballpark. You were. Okay, so I'm going to put 5,280 in the calculator. Let's see if you can see that. Oh, yeah, right there it is. Looks pretty good, doesn't it? So now I'm going to divide that by 8, and there you will see the furlong. 660 feet. I'll get this down. 660 feet. Okay, you guys remember this, right? We've been through this, haven't we?
Yes.
I mean, I don't want to bore people by reiterating this, but I never
5
get
minutes,
tired
Randall.
of looking at this. Okay.
3 of your 5 minutes are already gone. You have
3 of the minutes. Okay. Well, okay. We'll give them a bonus minute. Okay.
Okay.
Maybe even 2. So here's the point. So the city lieth foursquare, and the length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal. 12,000 furlongs. So it was 12,000 of these things, Matt. You see that 660 feet. So if I go times 12,000, that's how many feet I get. 7,920,000 feet. So the city lieth foursquare, the length, the height, and the breadth of it are equal. 7,920,000 feet. Okay. How many miles? I mean, that's 7,920,000 feet is a very difficult number to envision. Okay. How many? Now, Kyle, let's take you as an example. Hold you conspicuous before the entire world momentarily here. If you were to try to envision 7,920,000 feet, how far is that? Yeah, you see, it's you don't readily.
I don't readily have it, even though I know what it is in miles as well. It's still hard to imagine.
Okay, but yeah, you have to put it into miles to get some kind of a, because okay, you can translate it into miles and you go, oh yeah, I went the other day and I drove that many miles.
That's right.
But you're not going to think, oh yeah, I went out yesterday and I did a road trip and I drove 7,920,000 feet. And anybody who said that to would be what? Put that into some kind of a term that I can wrap my head around.
But I'll take it even a step further. If you're going 70 miles an hour and you still don't really get how far you've gone, because it's like something looks small to you when you're going 70 miles an hour, but then you get out and you actually see how big it is because you're not passing it at that speed. Still, I would suggest that it's pretty incomprehensible.
Well, so we simply let's convert it to miles.
Yeah.
And then we can get a picture. Okay. If we convert it to miles. So I've got that number, 7,920,000 feet. I'm going to divide it by the number of feet in a mile. So let's see, I'll go divide by, and Laura, how many feet in a mile? I forgot.
5,280.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I appreciate it. Okay. So there it is. I divide that number, 5,280, and I go, I will hit equal, and there we go. A nice round number. 1,500 miles. So let's see, how far is it from my house to your house? It's not quite 1,500, is it?
It's like 13, I think.
13, yeah. So it's like, what's that, about roughly the distance of America from the north to the south, maybe?
Yeah, that's not too bad. I was going to say halfway across the country, New York to LA.
Yeah, about halfway across the country. So the holy city is what? It's being described as a cube, 1,500 miles on a side, on an edge. That's kind of a bizarre.
That is a big tangent cube
image. The hell are they talking about? Well, you
have to leave it there. 5 minutes are up.
The 7,920 is an Earth measurement in itself.
Well, now here we go, Brad. Here we go. Brad is letting the cat out of the bag, but that's okay because that's what we were going to do. So if we go 660, put that number of the furlong back in. Now, I'm going to convert that number of feet, Matt, into inches. So I'm going to divide by 12. I'm going to multiply by 12. And what you're going to see is that it's that many inches right there, 7,920. Now, in a future podcast, I'll have my new globe that I'm going to get for my studio here. I'll be able to hold my prop up, my globe, and I'll be able to show you this. But you know that the planet Earth spins on its axis, and because it spins on its axis and it is not completely rigid, it bulges around the middle. It has enough plasticity that it will bulge out 13 miles on either side at the equator. 13 miles, total of 26 miles, which will be the difference between the equatorial diameter and the polar diameter. It's spinning on its axis, so the centrifugal force is throwing the material of the Earth out towards the equator. Well, so it is not a perfect sphere. It is an oblate spheroid. Okay, now that oblate spheroid has a certain surface area, right? And it also has an average diameter, even though, think about this, its mean diameter is going to be halfway between that 26-mile difference. So equatorial diameter, 7,926 miles. Polar diameter, 7,900 miles. Right, I'm rounding off a little bit. So it's 26 miles bigger this way than it is this way, right? Or 13 miles greater this way. The mean between those would be 7,913. However, the diameter of an ideally spherical Earth that would have the same volume and surface area as the oblate spheroid, which is the real Earth, is virtually 7,920 miles. So interestingly, this number shows up repeatedly in ancient structures and ancient accounts and traditions and so on. So look here, 7,920 is the number of inches in a furlong. 7,920 miles is the idealized sphere of the Earth. So there's a proportional relationship going on there. Think of this. A proportion is an equality of two ratios. We have a ratio of an inch to a furlong. Now let's think about that for a minute. Inch to furlong. Inch is this, the width of your thumb, right? Look here. I'll take this ruler right here. Okay. There you see an inch. And there's my thumb. Let me see if I can get this right there. 1 inch. My thumb is pretty much 1 inch in girth, in diameter. So now if I, Russ, am giving you the thumbs up sign, you know that there's another layer of meaning to this. Right? If I give you a thumbs up, you're now going, yes.
That I can take a mile.
7,920 of those.
Oh, okay.
In a furlong. Okay, so when we say a furlong, what's that? Well, a furlong, again, like I said, had the same origin as the Greek stade. And the Greek stade was based upon the human scale by thinking in terms of 1,000 paces. So now when you are out, you're pacing, you're walking along and you're going along here. Now, when you're pacing, and this has traditionally been, and we still do it. Like if I go out and I'm trying to get a general idea of the size of a piece of property, I pace it off, right? I just count my paces. But now, do I count like this? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or do I count 1, 2, 3? I would do it the second way, obviously, wouldn't I? I would count, my pace would be every time either my left or my right foot hit the ground. I wouldn't count every step. I'm not counting steps. I'm counting paces. So you're taking these double steps, right? So now a furlong, if you, or a stade, let's say, or a mile. Let's go back to the mile, because there, right in the word itself, is the clue as to origin. Mile is mil, right? Which in Latin means 1,000, right? So a mile was, the origin of the mile was 1,000 paces. So you can look at different cultures and they will have their corresponding units of measure that was usually ultimately based upon pacing out land, was part of like a land survey. So you would do 1,000 paces. And if your 1,000 paces was 5,280 feet, that meant each of your double paces was 5.28 feet. And that's where it came from. And so there now you have a ratio. And this is a very interesting ratio because we're saying pace to foot, right? Now, both of those you can see are derived from the human proportion, aren't they? The pace is you're stepping out. You're starting at point A on the surface of the earth and pacing out to point B. And so now you've traversed part of the great sphere that is the earth, right? The foot, what's that? Well, it's obvious again, it's the etymology of the word is right there in your face. It's the size of your foot. So now you think about this when you are sitting like right now, I've got my bare feet, my feet are right on the floor, right? Or my foot is on the ground. The foot is what connects us to the earth, isn't it? And I've said this before, like if Kyle, you would probably know that if at the bottom of your legs you didn't have any feet, it would be much harder for you to stand up with stability on the earth, wouldn't it?
I would imagine so.
Yes, your feet are very important. Without your feet, life is going to get more difficult. So your feet, nature's designed us with feet. And our feet spread out. They're bigger than our legs, aren't they? Right? Because their feet is what anchors us to the earth. So when you think a foot and a pace, right? They're both derived from the human scale. And we just saw that our modern mile is 5,280 paces. And each pace would be on average 5.28 feet. Now, if you did a furlong of 660 feet, 660 feet, yes, now you can see that's a much bigger person, isn't it? They're, instead of 5.28 feet for a pace, theirs is 6.6 feet. So that's a bigger person. Does that imply that the ancient Brits were bigger than the ancient Romans? Probably, maybe, I don't know. But so let's put all this together here now. Okay, so we see that there's a ratio between the pace and the foot, and it's 5.28 feet, right? That's a key ratio, and it finds its way into the ancient system of metrology or measurement. So now let's go back to the Holy City, because we didn't ever really leave the Holy City throughout any of this. We found that the Holy City was 12,000 furlongs on a side, and we found that there was 660 feet in a furlong, which meant that the number measuring the side of the Holy City was 7,920,000, or 1,000. The number is 1,000 in feet is 1,000 times the number of miles that measures the diameter of the earth. So that's an interesting correlation in itself and adds to the coincidence of this, because if we go back now and we think of the entire earth of 7,920 miles, right? And a mile is 1,000 human paces. What we're doing is we're linking a human derived unit of measurement and a geodetically derived unit of measurement, right? 1,000 human paces, 1 mile to the size of the earth, 7,920 of those miles. But now you look at the furlong, which is 660 feet, composed of 7,920 inches. So what we're saying is that the ratio of the inch to the furlong is exactly the same as the mile to the earth. We have a proportion. We have two ratios that are equal. Now, is that a coincidence? I don't know. Maybe it is, maybe it isn't. But if it's a coincidence, it's a hell of an interesting coincidence, I would say. Now, if you look at we just determined that if you take those 7,920 times 1,000, and you get that number of 7,920,000, which is the number of feet in the side of the Holy City, and we divide that by the number of feet in a mile to make it a more manageable number, we saw that it was 1,500 miles, right? There it is, 1,500 miles on a side. Now, we try to think of, okay, let's think about that in terms of some kind of comparable scale. When you're thinking 1,500 miles on a side, that's kind of getting us almost up to the size of a small planet, isn't it? The moon is 2,160 miles. Earth is 7,920. The holy city is described as 1,500 miles, right? So to help us think about the relationship between this mythical or symbolical holy city and, say, the moon, well, we could look at the ratio between the two, couldn't we? I mean, we could look at 1,500. We could divide it by 2,160, the number of feet in the diameter of the moon. And if we do that, we discovered that the moon is 1.44 times the size of the holy city. 1.44 is a number that recurs several times in the book of Revelations, because remember how many redeemed of the earth?
144,000.
Yep.
144,000. And then when the description of the holy city goes on, and it says in the city, after describing it, that it lieth four square, it says it had a wall great and high. Remember that? It was surrounded by a wall, a circular wall, we can assume. And it was described as being 144 cubits. So we're given the number twice, 144 and 144 raised by 3 orders of magnitude, which gives us 144,000. And it turns out that that is the ratio between the size of the moon and the size of the earth. The moon, and the holy city. So the moon is 1.44 times the size of the holy city. What about the earth? Well, what I'll do is I'll put in the diameter of the earth right there. You got it. I'm going to divide it by 1,500, the diameter of the holy city. And then we get the answer here, 5.28 feet. Did we just see that number? Yes, we did. The ratio of the pace to the foot and 1,000th of a mile. So now another kind of weird coincidence, isn't it? We have another proportion going on here. The proportion of the foot to the pace is exactly the same as the proportion of the holy city to the earth. So there's all kinds of very interesting symbolic connotations that we could tease out of this stuff. And I think that's what it's about. I think it's about, we've only looked at sort of the surface of this, but I know this took more than 5 minutes.
That was the best 5 minutes of Matt's life.
Yes.
So
That's right.
he says thanks.
Well, I hope so. But it gives you a little bit of the insight into how amazing the whole architecture of this thing really is. And what the rabbit hole that it leads us into once we start taking a closer look.
Great
And
stuff.
I like rabbit holes, by the way.
That's right. Well, we're getting close to the end here, but you want to tackle one more? This is
we want to take 5 minutes on the upcoming tours too, if we get a chance.
Yeah, well, we should probably do that because 5 minutes is about what we got left.
Well, you need to at least thank people.
I will. I could do that too.
Well, we want to talk too about CBD from the gods. I'm trying something new, which is I'm taking it during the daytime. And I'm finding that's an interesting thing, because I was doing it always before bed for sleep. But, I've been sleeping pretty good. So I've decided to try it during the daytime. And it does definitely seem to sort of, it seems when you're awake, and during the daytime for me, it's sort of like it's a different kind of an effect than it's like at night when I'm going to sleep. So I think it really does contribute to having more energy and more clarity through the day. I think so. But people, of course, experiment. I'm still learning about it by experimenting. What's my optimum dose, and so on. I found my optimum dose is a liter. Yeah, it's a whole liter. I just drink down like
Just
that.
slamming a liter.
A liter.
I just slam back. Yeah.
24-hour
milliliters.
Milliliters.
Okay. Yeah, I don't know
1,000th
what
of a
would happen
liter.
if I slam back a liter of the CBD oil. But hey, maybe I'll try that before bed tonight. See what happens. No, but yes, I'm finding the daytime use of it's a little different, and I'm enjoying it. And of course, still loving the salve, loving the salve. So I think now, remember what we talked about last time, that what was it? Who are the guys again? The Sharks. Remember the Sharks? The Shark guys.
Not sure about the
no
shark
idea what
guys.
you're talking about.
The Shark Tank people that
Shark Tank.
yeah,
That's
yeah.
what I was
support
looking
CBD
for.
from
Yeah.
the gods. Yeah.
Shark
Yeah,
guys.
you know, they're going to work
Somebody
with the
Harrington.
CBD from the gods, and we got to get out there and tour the plant. I really would like to see that. Like it was very interesting to see your operation that you guys got going there with your winemaking. I'd actually, like to learn more about that. Not that I would start making wine, but it just seems to me that the whole process seems to be a very interesting sort of alchemical allegory.
Yeah, we need to get you guys out here when
Yeah.
it's in like primary fermentation, and you can.
It'd be great for y'all
Hear
to
it.
come out in late August. Yeah.
Yeah.
Late August, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
It's
What
I'm
about
staying.
early
It's
September?
quite
Well,
cool.
no, we're going to be in Scablands in
Brad
early
just
September.
decided he's just gonna stay until late August.
Hey.
So, anyways,
it's
yeah,
already been
CBD
100
from the
degrees,
gods.
no.
I've still got keep my bottle handy.
Yeah,
We
we're
had a
gonna
lot
start.
of fun in Sedona too, we had a little contest giving away freebies, gummies, salve, and oil. So that's some kind of, I think, a tradition we're going to be doing on all of our tours now, is giving away some product, but not just
Cool.
randomly. You gotta
answer some questions and like
earn
prove
it.
that you know what's going on. Yeah.
You
That's
must
Although
earn it.
somehow we managed to organize in such a way that every bottle we got dispersed to somebody.
You just find questions that you think they can answer. Just keep asking until they.
Yeah,
get it. Okay.
look, if somebody's, I didn't hit any time, I'll come up with some really softball kindergarten level question.
How many inches are in a foot?
What's Randall
Like, what is the
done.
airspeed
Here's
velocity of a laden swallow? Whatever.
African or European swallow?
All right, so that next tour where we'll do such a CBD trivia will be out in Montana in like less than 4 weeks at this point. So we're kind of hovering around our maximum. Some people are bailing at the last moment, so there are spaces. I think we've got 2 right now.
Still?
Yep, they came and went. So if you go ahead and just get on the list, because there may be a few more that drop out. You never know. So if you've got the time coming up June 13 to 19, go to contact@thecabin.com and hook into our Montana with Randall Carlson tour.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that. That's going to be a lot of fun.
And we also have the 2 Scablands tours coming up after that as well. So if you're interested in getting
In
out
September,
there. Yeah.
and we're staying at the Notaris Lodge, which is going through a major upgrade, and so it looks like over the next few years we'll probably be partnering with the owners of the lodge, the resort, who are going to be establishing a sort of a wellness retreat.
Yep.
And so we will be combining future tours with wellness retreats, and I think that's going to bring it to another level. They'll be building a state-of-the-art spa, and we've got the saunas, and we'll have the
Already the saunas are amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, not the
Yeah.
saunas,
The bath.
the baths they have with the soap lake water.
Yeah, jacuzzi baths in there.
awesome.
You can get
in the
the
cabins.
mineral water from the lake. It's
Yes.
amazing. Yeah.
Yep. So that's going to be, and they're started work on the new restaurant. So I'm hoping it's finished by September. But
Right. So
yeah,
those
that's gonna be
tours will
great.
late September, the 19th through the 24th, and then 26th through October 1st. So you got 2 options there. Late September to meet us in the Scablands, and it is spectacular. The pictures on the podcast do not do it justice at all. Got to be there. Ask Graham Hancock. He said, I've never seen anything like this in my life before, and he has been all over the planet. So come out and join us in September. It's awesome.
That's right. All right. Let's thank Jarek and Brother Grimm, Brandon, Dejamatic, Oak Poacher, Marty Garza, and Rex Strigo. All of you guys, thank you so much for donating. Sorry we couldn't get to your questions. Got to get them in sooner.
Many, many, many thanks.
Randall can answer 3 questions every 2.5 hours. So
I'll try to do better next time. But the good question, to me, a good question is one where you can just really begin to elaborate on it. You know, I mean, there's
agree.
quick answers, sure, but hopefully the questions that were asked and the ones that we answered, I hope that the listeners found
everyone enjoyed it.
to be interesting excursions.
Sure. Absolutely.
So I want to say something too about if there are any patrons listening. I want to express my really sincere thanks, because a lot of those contributions that have come in through the patronage is creating this, which is, I think, is going to kick this up to the next level. It's going to allow us to really do much more professional work and get that work out to a wider audience, and try to get people really fired up and stimulated about the possibilities, because it's kind of like, it's almost like there's 2 roads in front of us here. And one of the roads is not going to lead to a happy ending. So I think we need to kind of identify those 2 roads and be clear on which one we want to try to navigate towards. And while there's still time, because see, the successful outcome, I don't believe is guaranteed to this experiment, this particular round of experimentation in the effort to build a civilization. So,
all right,
we need to get into that, and we will.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thanks, Randall. Great show.
Thanks to all the patrons. Support Randall, folks, if you guys don't already. We all love the research and the knowledge. So, keep it coming.
More
Thanks so much.
Episodes coming soon. As soon as I get home, get those. We got 2 already
to be edited. In the can, ready to go.
Soon.
Yeah.
And they're killer.
Guys. Yes, they are.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, chat.
Thanks, Randall.
See you guys next stream.
Good night, Laura.
Hopefully, it'll be
Good
about
night.
2 weeks.
Good night, Laura.
Yeah. Good night, everybody.